Before we get on to the video, do me a favor and hit the like button, it greatly helps out the channel. Also, while you're down there, subscribe for more. Now back to the video. The angels couldn't believe that Lee was choosing not to accept the quest. They stared at him with a shocked expression on their faces. Lee received a prompt from the system asking him if he was sure he would like to decline. The system asked him to select carefully as he may not get another chance. Lee glared at the prompt. He knows that the Guardian quest's pretext of protecting humanity is a good one, but in the end he will just become a part of a group. While the rewards will be guaranteed, his actions will be restricted periodically. And above all, a quest is merely a quest. Humans, however, aren't so simple. If this quest is misused, then a Guardian could turn into a villain in no time. Like humanity's worst traitor, Gordon Tracy, who started out as a Guardian as well. Lee gritted his teeth, and in an annoyed tone he questioned how many times he would have to say it, and he declined the quest again. He turned his head to the right, and he saw that the angel with blonde hair was looking at him with a saddened expression. Then he turned his head to the left, and he saw that the angel with red hair was looking at him with an annoyed look on her face. The angels flew back into the gate, and shortly after the gate started to close, and Lee just stood there watching as the gate fully closed. Afterwards, he motioned his hands towards the pile of bones, and he used metal control to bring a key towards him. After getting the key in his hands, he received a message from the system, congratulating him for winning the first rewards of the lucky event. And that reward was Akashic Armory Key number 2. Lee observed the key as it hovered in his hand. This key is what the villain Jusiep was searching for, and in order to get it, Jusiep was willing to slaughter innocent citizens. If it was the main quest reward, then Lee had no doubt in his mind that it's an object the villains needed. And in that case he was going to keep it, and screw over those villain fuckers big time in this life. As he exited the gate, Lee stored the key in his trench coat, with a grin on his face. At the temporary shelter, the guards and Minhee's team had arrived, and the guards were doing their best to calm the civilians down. The female guard that Lee saved reported to Manhwa that a guard with a scar on his face told the citizens about the double gate. This didn't make any sense to Manhwa. He addressed the civilians, saying he was the only guard with a scar on his face. The civilians were then asked to take a good look at Manhwa's face so they could figure out if Manhwa was the traitor. The civilians got a good look, and they came to the conclusion that it wasn't Manhwa. But either way, the fact still remains that the guards hid information about the double gate from them, and the civilians expressed that they didn't have any guarantee that the guards and military members won't use them as human shields. Lee, who was approaching, heard everything. This annoyed him greatly, because even in death Jusiep is causing a commotion for him. Minhee tried to calm the situation down. He asked the civilians if they would be willing to trust him, the captain of the AMT rescue team. Seeing the rescue team made Lee smile, because it confirmed Kangseok didn't give up on Seoul Station until the very end in his previous life, and he sent Lieutenant Lee Minhee where he was needed at the perfect time. In response to Minhee, the civilians questioned why they should trust him. They couldn't trust the words of Minhee when the rescue team that was sent into the unlucky event was a team of just 6 people. And they asked him to explain how he plans to perform the rescue operation. Minhee was taken aback by the pushback of the civilians and he couldn't respond. This angered them even more, and they all expressed that as the rescue team captain, Minhee is supposed to have a plan. While still a distance away, Lee shouted, asking for someone to explain what is going on here. And as he got closer, he continued shouting, questioning if the civilians understand that if the second wave starts, then they were all going to end up dead. The civilians expressed to Lee that they couldn't trust the guards or rescue team anymore, which is the only reason why they were being this way. Lee glared at the civilians with an angry look on his face, and he asked them if they had another plan since they couldn't trust the military or the guards. The way Lee was speaking took the civilians, the guards, Minhee, Junmo, Seonha, and the rest of the rescue team by surprise. Lee continued on saying that the guards fought with their lives at stake to protect the civilians, and he questioned if that wasn't trustworthy enough. He asked the civilians if any of them would be willing to put their lives on the line to fight and protect the others. Finally, the civilians were all quiet. They looked amongst themselves to see if anyone would be willing to step up. While this went on, Minhee addressed Lee. He called him a rascal for talking to and treating the citizens this way. On top of that, he demanded that Lee tell him where he was hiding all this time, that he is only showing up now. Lee replied in a cold tone, telling him that he just blocked the double gate. This made Junmo happy. However, Seonha, the civilians, and some of the guards, except Man, who were left speechless. Then he couldn't believe that Lee, an F-rank, blocked a double gate all on his own, and he expressed angrily that Lee must be lying. Lee glared at him with an irritable look on his face, saying the second wave will start soon, and he requested that the civilians hide as best as possible. Then he asked Minhee and the guards to follow him. Man, who followed Lee's orders, and he ordered the other guard to help the civilians barricade the entrance with chairs and desks so they would be able to hide. Minhee was taken aback by Lee's commanding authority and the fact that his own words, as the captain of the rescue team, meant nothing to anyone in this situation. This made him question if this really was the same Lee he knew. Sometime later, after all the civilians were in a safe place, Lee prepared to explain his plan to everyone, but before that Junmo approached. He handed Lee the Cloud Blade, and he handed Seonna her spell book. Lee thanked Junmo. Afterwards he addressed the others. He asked them to gather around him because he wanted to tell them something. After the guards and the rescue team gathered around him, Lee explained to them that the first wave spider monster wasn't mentioned in the field guide, and thanks to his metal skill and the guards' force, they managed to stop the first wave. However, Lee felt like it was still somewhat lacking for an unlucky event monster. Manhwa agreed, saying that even though the spider monsters were formidable, it still felt kinda strange how easily Lee was able to handle it. Lee then expressed that he thinks he felt that way because it was the first wave. He explained that this is an unlucky event, and an unlucky event is also a kind of event, so he concluded that it must have stages. And during the second wave, he suspected that monsters that use the spider's characteristic, venom, might show up. Minhee was still angry. Not just Seonna but the guards were listening so intensively to Lee. This made him question how he gained their trust. Since he suspected that venom would be a problem in the second wave, Lee told the others to wear a gas mask beforehand. Lee also felt like no matter how big Seoul Station is, there was still a chance the civilians could be exposed to poisonous gas if it keeps spreading how he suspected it would. So he told the others that they have to lure the monsters from the second wave outside the platform at all costs. With all this out of the way, he decided to explain the details of how he plans to execute this operation to everyone present. Firstly, when the second wave starts, it is a must that they draw the attention of the monsters that appear and lure them outside, and Lee placed himself in charge of getting the monsters' attention. Secondly, the rescue team and the guards will wait outside in units, and they will attack the monsters lured outside from a spot where they can also take cover and hide in case of an emergency. Similar to the first wave, Lee explained that they simply need to bind the monsters' feet and bide their time. He expressed that no matter what, the others should not get close to the monsters. Then once they found a good fighting spot, and he ripped off the spider monster's armor, he wanted the others to focus on the part that had been exposed and take down the monsters. Finally, for the key part, for a higher chance of this operation's success, Minhee and Seonna must lead them from a high position, and if Minhee continuously helps him teleport using the warp ability, Lee expressed that he can focus all of his mana and stamina into ripping off the armor of all the spider monsters that will appear. And if Seonna continuously replenished Minhee's mana, then Lee suspected that they could use Minhee's warp ability till the end of the second wave. Above all, Lee expresses that there is only one person capable of recognizing and handling the risky situations of every unit, and that person is Minhee, who is well versed in raid tactics, which is why he was putting him and Seonna in charge of leading them from a high vantage point. Lee's compliment made Minhee happy. To mask this, he covered his mouth, and he spoke in a confident tone that this strategy wasn't bad, and he guessed that they should be able to get through without much damage. With a smile, Lee expressed that they will be in Minhee's care then. Lee was confident that with the warp ability of Minhee, the C ranker who's merely at level 15, they could easily complete this operation. The guards and the others quickly got into position, and as the second wave started, Lee approached the front line, announcing to the others that the second wave was starting, and telling everyone to get ready. A monster dropped from the gate, and its landing kicked up a gust of wind. Lee quickly covered his face, shielding his eyes from the debris that were sent flying by the wind. However, he kept one eye open so he could observe the monster. And as the dust settled, Lee could be seen with a menacing grin on his face. He couldn't wait to face the second wave, as he believed fully in the plan he made. However, in that moment he received a message from the system reminding him that the only way to survive this unlucky event is to survive for 6 hours or defeat the boss monster. But for some reason this message placed an emphasis on the part about defeating the boss monster. Lee quickly realized what this meant. However, he was in disbelief. He just couldn't accept the fact that fate would do him like this. But after the dust fully cleared, he could see the monster standing in front of him with a menacing aura. And to further confirm what he was thinking, he received a message from the system telling him the boss monster had appeared. And shortly after he received another message telling him to defeat the boss monster. Lee quickly realized that the future had changed. He shouted for everyone to run with a distraught look on his face. Minhee couldn't understand what was happening, and he wanted to get a grip on the situation first, so he ordered everyone to stay put and hold their positions. He told the others that there would be no change in the raid plan, and that they must lure the monster away from the citizens. The boss monster took a look around, noticing the corpse of the spider monsters that came before it. This greatly angered it. It gritted its teeth, then it let out a roar that sent a shockwave throughout Seoul Station. The roar of the monster was so loud that the others covered their ears in fear of bursting their eardrums. Lee glared at the boss monster and he gritted his teeth in annoyance. According to what he remembered from his previous life, the boss monster appeared after the second wave. This made him question if the future changed again because of him. In a rage, the boss monster attacked Lee and he quickly moved out of the way. After dodging the monster's attack, Lee finally decided to get his act together, since if he didn't stop the boss monster it would mean annihilation. He reached forth his hand and he used Metal Smash, depleting his mana to 72%. However, nothing happened to the boss monster, it just angered it further. Lee also received a warning from the system, informing him that the skill Metal Smash failed because the strength of the steel he tried to smash is higher than the force of Metal Smash. Lee couldn't believe it. He stared at the boss monster, wondering what to do now that Metal Smash failed. As he thought about his next move, the boss monster attacked him. Luckily, he was able to dodge using the body strengthening and metal control skill chain. So instead of hitting Lee, the monster's attack struck one of the pillars, completely destroying it. Since the boss monster's attack was able to blow away the pillar, Lee concluded that even body strengthening wouldn't stand a chance. Again, while he was distracted, the boss monster attacked him from behind. Lee took notice and this time he used the skill chain to spin himself out of harm's way. Then he propelled himself towards the boss monster using the skill chain. Lee had a determined look on his face because he knew of only one way to get out of this. The chance of it succeeding is low, but it's the only way. As Lee got closer to the boss monster, Minhee called out to him, calling him a maniac and telling him to stick to their plan to lure the monster outside. Lee continued to charge forward, putting his faith in the fact that Minhee will soon catch on to his plan. In a flashback of Lee's previous life, we see him approaching Minhee after a recent mission. Lee addressed Minhee as Tactical Action Officer, and after hearing his rank, Minhee turned around questioning if Lee is trying to make some excuse about his actions during this mission by calling him by his rank. Lee thanked Minhee, because if it wasn't for his warp skill then he wouldn't have gotten out alive, and Minhee expressed in a cocky tone that that is the reason he is the Tactical Action Officer. Lee continued on saying he is happy to have Minhee as his partner. With a smile he expressed that Minhee has shown he wasn't bluffing when he said he memorized all the tactical manuals as an officer. Minhee tapped his forehead, and he told Lee in a proud tone that memorizing books isn't all there is to actual battle tactics. He expressed that he has been letting those tactics age in his head so he can use it for later. Minhee continued on, and he explained to Lee that to get past his warp ability's limitation of the rear position, he needs to have every tactical detail down so he can use the warp skill at the right time and place. Lee was taken aback, and with a look of disbelief on his face, he questioned if Minhee really meant he memorized everything. Minhee pointed at himself and he spoke in a proud tone, saying every single tactic is a result of his struggle for survival. In the present, Minhee observed Lee, trying to figure out what Lee is planning to do. Minhee and Siana continued to observe Lee as he led the monster around Seoul Station in a ruckus. In the meantime, Lee's mana had depleted to 45%, and it was still rapidly decreasing because he was using the skill chain to dodge the rampaging boss monster's attacks. His mana reserve quickly depleted to 32%, however Lee continued to dodge the boss monster's attacks, holding out hope that Minhee, with his profound knowledge of tactics, will figure out what he is planning. As he continued to observe Lee, Minhee noticed that most of the boss monster's attacks ended up breaking pillars. Minhee finally realized that Lee wasn't just thoughtlessly dodging the attacks, he was directing all of the boss monster's attacks at the pillars. But even if Lee was able to take down all the pillars, then in the middle of that thought, he realized what Lee was planning. He took off his gas mask and gritted his teeth, then he turned to Siana and he asked her to give him as much mana as possible. Siana was confused, and she questioned why Minhee wanted that much mana. Minhee explained to her that he is going to create the biggest warp zone he can right now. Lee's mana had depleted to 27%, however the final pillar was in sight. As he was heading towards it he prayed his body would be able to hang in there. However, the boss monster suddenly stopped, and it lifted both hands in the air, and it proceeded to strike the ground with all the force it could muster. The debris created from the boss monster striking the ground hit Lee in the back, sending him flying into the final pillar. Lee managed to catch himself on the pillar, however as he was getting his bearings he noticed the boss monster's leg heading towards him. Lee quickly activated the body strengthening skill on his upper half, and he braced himself for the attack. The boss monster's attack broke through the final pillar, and it sent Lee's body flying again. Lee's body crashed into a wall. He suffered great damage, however the final pillar holding up Seoul Station was destroyed, and the building was starting to crumble. The boss still hadn't noticed that the building was starting to crumble. It approached Lee, preparing to end it. As the monster approached, Lee realized that he needed to act as bait so the monster wouldn't figure out their plan. Using the wall, he slowly started to get his bearings to face the boss monster. Minhee, who had realized what Lee was planning, finally got enough mana from Siana, and he shouted for Lee to move out of the way. A portal appeared below one of the boss monster's leg, and Minhee continued shouting that Lee would get swept up too once he activated his warp ability. Minhee did his best, but he was struggling to hold back his charged up power. Lee, who could barely speak, told Minhee that if he doesn't do it now, when the boss monster is still focused on him, then they will all die. Minhee knew deep down that Lee was right, however he still continued to hold his power back. But shortly after he released the skill with distraught look on his face, a giant portal appeared below the boss monster, causing it to lose its balance. It was then teleported to the lowest floor of Seoul Station, where it crashed onto the floor. After getting its bearings, the boss monster stood, and that area of the building had already started to crumble, and it rained down rocks on the boss monster. As that area of Seoul Station crumbled, Lee could be seen with a grin on his face. He never lost faith in Minhee, and he knew Minhee would be able to do it. That area of the building collapsed. Then in a flashback of Lee's memories, we see him and Yoonho looking over the corpses of the people that he had brought with him on a mission to defeat a monster. Lee expressed in a saddened tone that they had lost too many comrades in arms during this operation, and this was making him doubt whether he even deserves to be the leader. Seo Yoonho turned her head towards Lee and she called his name. Then she asked him if he was going to keep up with this weak talk. She questioned who decides if someone deserves to lead, and she asked him if he still doesn't trust himself. Lee remained silent, he just turned his head sadly. In the present, Lee's mana had been depleted to 3%, and the grin on his face suddenly disappeared. He started losing strength, and as he fell down, he apologized to everyone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then hit the like button.